Thank you all for joining us today. My name is PJ Stevens. I'm on the marketing team here at SmartBear, and I'm really excited to share with you all today a co-branded webinar between SmartBear and Spec Solutions on the topic, Is BDD for Me? Where we'll be talking about some of the benefits of BDD, and one of our esteemed panelists will be walking through some of his experiences with BDD. So whether you're a beginner or an expert, we think that you'll learn something new today. And we certainly hope that you'll ask some questions as well. So before we get started, I just want to quickly introduce our panelists. First, we have Gaspar Nagy. He is the creator and the main contributor of Specflow, a regular conference speaker, blogger, editor of the BDD Addict monthly newsletter, and co-author of the book Discovery, Explore Behavior Using Examples. He's also an independent coach, trainer, and test automation expert focusing on helping teams implement BDD and Specflow. He has more than 15 years of experience in enterprise software development as he worked as an architect and agile developer coach. How's it going today, Gaspar?
Oh, it's so fine. Thank you.
Great, great. On the other side here, we've got Bria Grangard from SmartBear. She's a subject matter expert in the software testing field, managing SmartBear's products, hip test and cross-browser testing. She's spoken at many conferences around the globe, and she's very excited to present this webinar with us today. How's it going, Bria?
Going pretty well. Thanks for the intro, PJ.
Of course. Awesome. Really excited to have you guys together to present this. I think this is really exciting for us. So quickly, we'll just walk through the agenda for the session today. We just did our introductions, a couple of quick housekeeping items. You'll see a Q&A box on Zoom here, so you're more than welcome to submit any questions. We will, as you'll see at the end of the agenda there, we'll have time for Q&A towards the end. Also note that this webinar is being recorded, so we will happily send you the recording out via email either tomorrow or on Monday, and we'll also make the slides available to you then as well. So Gaspar is going to be running the main presentation, and then we'll have a little time for a quick demo of one of our BDD tools, hip test, as well as some information about Spec Solutions, and then we'll do Q&A. So with that, I will kick it over to Gaspar to run us through.
Great. Thank you. And so basically, you have started to introduce us. I also have an intro slide about myself, but I think basically you have said everything that that is here. What is very important and what I would like to highlight is that I sometimes call myself as a BDD addict, and this is also a newsletter that you have mentioned. Basically, in this newsletter, I try to collect interesting articles every month that I read about BDD, about test automation or agile testing. So if you also want to see what others are talking about BDD or saying about BDD, then go to bddaddict.com and you can subscribe for this newsletter. Of course, it's all free, and basically you'll see these pieces of information every month. The other thing that you just mentioned, that I work for, or my company is called Spec Solutions. Basically, it's my training and consulting firm, so it's my legal entity from this perspective. And in the scope of Spec Solutions, basically we are focusing on three main topics. Definitely our primary topic is training and coaching. So I'm doing quite many BDD and Specflow trainings. I also sometimes do Cucumber trainings or test-driven development, agile testing courses as well. We regularly have public courses. The next ones will be in London and Budapest. You see it on the slides. However, I do a lot of private courses as well. Whoever knows me, typically they know me because of Specflow. So I have created Specflow like 10 years ago. And just because I'm doing training and consulting, I also try to keep engaged with the Specflow open source project. Besides that, there are many other very good contributors as well there. So I'm also focusing on that also inside Spec Solutions. And we also have a product called SpecSync, which is basically an integration tool between BDD scenarios and Azure DevOps or TFS in its old name. So basically, this was the quick intro about myself and Spec Solutions. And now I'm handing over to Bria, who will say a few words about SmartBear.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Gaspar, for joining us here today. We're really excited to have you and co-host this with Spec Solutions. We wanted to share quickly who SmartBear is. So SmartBear was founded in 2009, and we have 11 global offices coming to you from 2 different offices today. And then we also have Gaspar, so 3 different remote locations today. Really excited you all could also join us. We have over 6.5 million users with over 22,000 customers. And we're also known for a lot of our free tools and our leadership in our open source community. And you'll actually see a demonstration of one of our free tools today. And so if you do look at our product portfolio, we really focus on spanning the entire software development lifecycle, as well as focusing on going deep into each of those different phases you might break them out into. So for design, creation, test execution, as well as monitoring. And we want to also focus on fitting in with the tools people are already using today, whether they're using open source tools, their own proprietary tools or frameworks. We want to be sure we are open, flexible, and interoperable. And you'll see that as a message throughout all of our tools. And if you've already tried one of our free tools or are a current customer today. But what I wanted to focus on today was really our behavior-driven development, our BDD solution. Clearly, that's what drove a lot of you all here to this webinar today, as well as having Gaspar here. And you know, as we talk about BDD, and we'll go into a lot of this in greater detail here soon, but we really focus on describing the behavior, rooting it in example, defining our acceptance criteria, writing executable specifications, executing our automated test, refactoring our test that might have failed, and then documenting our product features over time. So in the center of this all for SmartBear is a tool called HipTest, which is really the flagship behavior-driven development collaboration platform. We also have test automation tools that help with this, including Test Complete, cross-browser testing, as well as test left. And we recognize that, you know, with Cucumber, Specflow, a lot of different automation frameworks out there, we can help accelerate your BDD life cycles. So this is the product we're going to be talking about in a little bit more detail later on in this webinar. HipTest, which really focuses on giving you this platform for collaboration to break down those silos between different stakeholders, accelerating your development with automated testing, and also gaining real-time insights with living documentation. So we just wanted to do a 2-minute overview to set the stage on who we are. But as PJ mentioned, please feel free to ask questions throughout in the Q&A box. We'll either answer them throughout or make sure we get to them at the end of the presentation. And with that, Gaspar, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, well, actually, this is still, I think, still for you first,
You're right?
right? Yeah.
So before I hand it back, we wanted to see who all is joining us today. So this will just give Gaspar and I a little bit of a better idea of who is coming to us. Are you a BDD expert? Are you very experienced? Are you just trying to figure out what this acronym stands for? That's okay too. This will just help better guide our conversation and webinar for the day. Gaspar, I'm going to go with your the expert in this category.
All right, I will just give everybody 2 more seconds to answer. Great. Thanks everyone for answering. Let's take a look at the results here.
All right, so we have no experts. That's okay. A few
I haven't voted.
Experienced, a lot that are just trying to figure it out. So you've come to the right place. This is going to be super helpful. Whether you're very experienced, a novice, I know I'm going to learn a lot too.
Great. Okay, so shall we move on then?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, Good. So basically, as you have heard in the introduction, right now we will have this presentation part, and after that, after the demo, there will be a Q&A. So let me start my talk with Specflow. Not only because I don't want to talk about Specflow in detail. Specflow is a behavior-driven development tool for .NET. It's an open source tool. It's basically the cucumber for .NET, as the tagline says. But I wanted to bring Specflow onto the first page because actually this is how my BDD story starts. So this is how I learned about BDD. And actually this was more like 10 years ago when I was encountered with BDD, or when I first heard about BDD. And when I created Specflow, Specflow was created as a small home tool, or definitely I didn't think about that it will be picked up by the community and will be more popular. Definitely my goal with the tool was not to create a new BDD tool, but at that time I was working as a developer coach or lead developer for a project, and that project had some issues, had some challenges, and actually I wanted to see whether BDD could help us for those challenges. So this is why I created the tool, just to be able to support the evaluation process, so to say, of BDD. So essentially, if I want to phrase it really as a single sentence, but why I created Specflow, then the thing is that I wanted to check whether BDD is for me or BDD is for my project. So this is why I have chosen this main theme, this topic for this presentation today. And obviously, since then, I have seen many different arguments and many different answers for that. And of course, there is definitely not a clear answer because every situation, every context is different. I will not be able to tell all of these, but I have selected a few, actually three smaller stories, or three stories that were somewhat important for me, or this is how the thing has started for me. And I hope that you will find that also useful. So this is basically how the presentation will be structured. There will be three stories, three different aspects of how BDD can influence the development process and how it can help us. So as I said, I couldn't fit everything into this presentation. However, last year we have published a book with Seb Rose called Discovery. The Discovery is basically a book which is about the requirement analysis aspect of BDD, or the collaboration aspect of BDD. However, we have created the book in a way that it also focuses on the different benefits or different core concepts of BDD. So whatever I'm saying is also partly in the book, and but in the book there are maybe even more. Later on, I will have a slide where you can get some ideas what else you're gonna find in the book if you just check that out. Okay, so let me get back to my story, and let me see how my story has started with BDD. And actually, I said that that at that time when I started to evaluate BDD, or started to check whether BDD can help me, our projects have some challenges, some problems. And actually these challenges were related to tests, related to automated tests. So I thought that it's anyway a webinar which is related to a testing tool like HipTest. So I think maybe it's a good place to start. So let's start to see the things from the testing point of view. So basically what my first story will show is how we can get from tests to BDD, and how BDD can influence testing challenges, testing problems that you might also have, or definitely the ones that I have had. I think if you have joined this webinar, then probably you have some relation to tests. So maybe you are a tester, maybe you are a developer who is also writing automated tests, or a product owner or a business person who is who would like to get more benefit out of the test. So if you are somehow having a relation to tests and quality, then probably you know that that nowadays it looks like that quality and tests are somehow seems to be more popular, more important than before. And the typical answer to this increased challenges of quality from the industries to introduce more testing and more automation. And this is pretty clearly also visible on the different statistics. So there are a couple of yearly reports about the different testing aspects. And what you can see through them is that the companies are spending more and more money on QA, and typically teams are increasing their ratio of test automation year by year. And this is all good. However, if you have ever tried that, or if you have ever worked in a project where you had a massive amount of tests or massive amount of automation tests, then you know that there are some traps here, and the things can also go wrong. So I have 3 children, and as they have somehow started to grow, I suddenly have understood what this meaning of small kid, small problem, big kid is big problem kind of saying has a meaning. And I have tried to translate this a little bit to testing, and because I think that's also true for testing. So as long as you have a small amount of tests, then all of your challenges might be small. But once you get a really bigger amount of tests, then you might have bigger problems. And maybe some of you are already knowing this. So typically, this bigger amount of tests are starting to be very slow. They are taking several hours to get them running, and the feedback loop is somehow not that fast anymore. They are brittle. So you need to constantly change them and fix them and adapt them to the changes of the product. If you need to have this maintenance, sometimes they might need an awful lot of maintenance. So maintenance is a very important aspect of handling such larger amount of tests. And last but not least, sometimes they even fail. Nobody was telling me this before that, okay, once I created a test which is green, even half a year later, they suddenly start failing. So we have to spend, again, a lot of time to understand why they are failing and how to fix that. So, I mean, if this is true, and if such a systems with a bigger amount of tests are causing problems, maybe it would make sense to check or answer the question, what's wrong with our tests? And obviously, there are probably plenty of different answers for that, and there can be many ways how our tests can be wrong. However, let me just share one aspect, or at least this is what I have learned about our tests that we had when we started to deal with BDD. And to illustrate what the problem was in our case, at least, I was trying to find some dialogues, some episodes that have happened, maybe not exactly with the same words, but that have happened in the company where I was working for. And maybe if we go through this 4 quick dialogue, then maybe you will also start to see what might be the problem with this thing, with these tests that we had there. So the first dialogue, the first episode in this scene was when the product owner was coming to the team and saying that, hey, it looks like that we have far too many production issues. So we have to improve our continuous delivery pipeline somehow. You need to write more tests. And the point is that at this point, the team is understanding the problem. So of course, the situation is clear, but writing more tests is not really a constructive feedback. So how much more? This is probably the team is asking. But maybe in another episode, the product owner is trying to learn about that there are different kinds of tests, and maybe the problem is with the ratio or with the balance of these different kinds of tests. So he's coming to the team and asking that, okay, are your tests balanced according to the test automation pyramid, meaning that you have only a few end-to-end high-level tests and you have a more unit tests and at the end. The team is saying that, well, not really. Maybe all of our tests or majority of our tests are more like end-to-end. So our shape is more like an ice cream cone. And product owner says, oh, then there is the result. You have to write more unit tests, and this will save our quality problems. But, you know, writing more unit tests, again, the team probably cannot really do anything with that. In the third episode, the product owner comes and realizes what the problem is. The problem is that we don't have good enough coverage. So comes to the team and says that, hey, you should increase your test coverage. But the team is asking back, what kind of coverage do you mean? You mean the line coverage, something that we can measure very easily during the execution of the test? And how much you want to increase it? What is a good ratio of that? Or what is a good test coverage that? And of course, the product owner cannot really answer that because code lines are something which is not their business. And maybe the last episode, the fourth episode, product owner comes and says that, hey, you have to probably cover the risks better. And again, that would be great, but again, the team cannot really do anything with that. How do we know that we have covered the risks, and how we don't know how much we should cover them? So these were the episodes more or less that I have seen before first trying out BDD. And maybe if you have seen these 4 episodes, especially after each other, maybe you already started to see what is the common theme here. Basically, the common theme is that the product owner is somehow trying to control the testing activities. And which is not bad. I mean, the product owner is responsible for the product, so obviously, and responsible for the quality as well. So controlling it in a good sense, that's absolutely great. But there were some problems here, and this problem is what I would like to show with these 2 diagrams or 2 spaces. So you can imagine that there is a kind of problem space and there is a kind of solution space. And to make it more understandable, we can say that the requirements, the product ID, the product domain is typically sitting in a problem domain, while our application, something that we are developing, what we are solving, how we are solving the problem is somehow sitting in the solution space. Also, it's pretty clear that, that the product owner is more part of the problem domain side. He's more representative of the business. However, if you want to place our tests into this diagram, then what you will see is that in majority of the cases, our tests are somehow also part of the solution domain. And actually what was happening in these episodes and what was happening in my project is that the product owner was trying to control the test. However, the tests were not in the same zone, not in the same space that he was operating in. So basically, maybe the core problem here was that the product owner was trying to control something which was anyway outside of his control. So if this is the case, so if the problem is that the product owner probably cannot move into the solution space, so we don't want to hire another product owner who is more technical, but what we could do is that we could try to move this test into the shared ownership. So somehow move into the test into the space which is part of both of the problem domain and the solution domain, so that product owner can understand that and can give feedback about these tests, and the delivery team can still use these tests and verify the applications through that. So that would be our goal. So try to move the test into this shared ownership part. But of course, the question is how this could be done. So how the entire team could own the tests. And to be able to answer that, let me just zoom in a little bit. So basically, this is the same thing that we have seen, the problem domain and the solution domain. And if you think about requirements, typically requirements in an application are represented with some kind of business rules, acceptance criteria, just general rules. And if you think about what is the counterpart in the solution space, probably in the solution space, probably the developers will implement some piece of code, some increment of the software, which is finally implementing this business rule. You don't need to understand the code here. It's just more like a representation here. But he also said that typically our tests are also in the solution space. So this means that it's also codified, or it's written with a technical script language. And this is how it tests the requirements, the business rules. So this is what we have seen now. To be able to solve this, so to be able to try moving this test into the shared ownership part, basically what we could use is to start using the idea or the concept of specification by example. So specification by example has been popularized by a guy called Gojko Edžić. He has 2 great books about spec by example. However, the concept of specification by example has been existing already earlier. So many people were saying that that understanding the requirements through examples is a good idea. And generally, this is how humans are anyway working. So typically, if we learn something as a child or as an adult, then we are learning it through examples. This is how we can better understand problems. So if you try to apply specification by example here, what that would mean that whenever we look at our requirements, we would try to collect some illustrative examples for that. Okay, illustrative example is nothing very complex thing. It's basically a small story which is showing how that particular business behavior, expected behavior, can be observed by the end user. So for example, if this is a pin change, then it says that, okay, what has happened and what should be the expected outcome. Of course, for one business rule, you might need to collect multiple examples as well. But right now I was just showing one particular example. Obviously, with the solution, with the implementation is the same. So we would like to implement the business rule with an increment of the source code. However, if you have this situation, so if you have such illustrative examples, and if you want to write your first tests, then basically what you see is that actually this example is a very good input for any kind of test. Can it be a manual test or an automated test? Because it basically just tells what are the typical steps that I need to do, what is the data that I need to use. So it's a very good way to start with a test. So implementing a test with that would be pretty easy, which would automate this particular example. That's very good. So right now there is already some kind of connection of the test to something which is sitting in the problem space, like the illustrative example. However, the problem is that codified tests are typically hard to maintain. As long as you write the test, everyone remembers where the example was that it was created from. But half a year later or a year later, if you come back to this test, then it will be, this information will be somewhat lost. So what was the example? Why these numbers were used? What exactly what we wanted to verify? These are typically all the questions that you would probably ask, and this is what causes the maintainability a little bit harder. So so maybe VDD could help here, and actually the situation to illustrate the situation in the BDD way, the start is exactly the same. So we would like to illustrate the requirements with examples, and hopefully at the end there will be some solution as well. However, what we would like to do here, we don't want to write a codified test based on the example, but we would like to make this example, we would like to formulate this example in a way that it's somehow automatable. So somehow it's understandable by a tool. And basically this formulation is introducing this context or this term of a BDD scenario. BDD scenario is nothing else than a formulated example, basically a documentation of an example with some little bit specific format. Typically in the most of the BDD tools is using the keywords given, when, and then, and it's using the English language, the domain language, so it's business readable. So basically it documents these examples. However, it documents them in a way that because there is a little bit of syntax, there's a little bit of format around them. Now, different tools like Cucumber, like Specflow, or even like HipTest can understand this format and basically can do something with it. And particularly if you are talking about test execution, then these tools can take this scenario and with a little bit of additional input, how the different, what kind of different automation elements do we need? This is in HipTest called the action words or the step definitions in the different BDD tools. Basically, with the input of that, with the same scenario, so without codifying the scenario, it can verify whether the solution that we have implemented is really fulfilling the expectations or not. So basically what you see here is that the BDD scenarios are basically representing this central element, this form of a test which is sitting in the shared ownership space. So this is what we could use to make a better connection between the delivery team and the product owner and something like that. So to simplify a little bit the diagram, we could say that we have the requirement and the app in the two sides. We are having the scenarios sitting in the middle, and basically on one hand, the scenarios can validate the understanding of the requirements, validate the consistency of the requirements. On the other hand, the scenarios can verify whether our application really fulfills these requirements. And this is basically the core concept of behavior-driven development, so that through these scenarios, which are sitting in the shared ownership space, we can have a connection between the problem and the solution. So basically, it's a kind of a bridging the gap between these two sides. Okay, so if this is the core concept of BDD or behavior-driven development, but we can also see that in BDD we are using different kind of activities, different kind of things that we typically practice whenever we are doing BDD. And actually, it's quite well visible also in this diagram. So in the first place, when we are collecting the examples, this is what some people are calling the discovery phase of BDD, or discovery activity of BDD. This means that we are building up the shared understanding through structured conversations and illustrative examples. The second phase, the second activity that you need to do to practice BDD is to turn these examples into documented scenarios. This is what we are calling formulation. So basically the act where you are taking the examples and writing them down using this given, when, then language, or some kind of formal language that can be understood by the tool. And obviously, once it's done, then the automation can complete the picture, and this is how we can solve the verification problem. So these are the three core activities that you need to practice with BDD: discovery, the formulation, and the automation. So basically what you have seen here, or what you have seen in this through this first story, that we have started from the problem that we wanted to move the tests into the shared code ownership, or the shared ownership space, and once we had to see that to be able to do that, we need to find a form of a test which is understandable by both the product owners, both but the business side, and usable for the delivery team side. And this is how we at the end got to the scenario, which is representing this kind of central element. And finally, we have seen how it's connected with the different BDD activities. So basically what we have seen here is that how from the testing problems, how from the testing side, you can see how BDD can bring any benefit into that. Before I move on, and before I move on to my next story, what I would like to highlight, and this is very, very important, that even though that right now we are seeing BDD from the testing point of view, and this is a very important aspect of that, but BDD is definitely not only about testing. And this is a kind of misconception that many BDD practitioners have. They are seeing it too much as a testing tool, and not seeing this collaboration aspect, this discussion aspect of that. And so BDD is not only about testing. BDD is about functional quality. That's true. However, functional quality is not just about whether the thing is working as expected, which would be the testing aspect of that, but functional quality is also about whether these expectations are good and whether these expectations are well documented. This is also very important, and this is why the collaboration, this discovery phase or aspect of BDD is also very important. This is what I would like to talk about a little bit in the two other stories that I would like to share with you. So my next story is related to the product owner. Actually, I was pretty lucky because I had a chance to work with quite good product owners. So I really have seen how easy it is to work with a good product owner. However, and maybe this is related to that. So maybe because they were good product owners, they were always overloaded and they were always busy. And whenever we started to introduce BDD, actually we had the situation that we had an overloaded product owner, overloaded business side. And we wanted to introduce something which increases the collaboration. So it was quite risky, or we'll be able to do this. If our product owner is anyway busy, will BDD help us? Will BDD really, for me, even in this situation? And this is what my next story is about. Before I go into the story, maybe it would make sense to highlight what does a good product owner mean, at least to me. For me, a good product owner is someone who is really wanting to understand the problem and not just passing through the team. So he's really listening to the customers, listening to the other business analysts, and trying to understand and make a full picture in his or her head about the problem domain before talking to the team. Also, I think it's a very important characteristic of a good product owner if they are really eager to help and support the team. So if they are really sitting on the same boat and not just trying to pass through the problem to the delivery side, and if they have problems, that's their problems. But trying to help and support them, I think this is a very important thing. And also, I think it's also very important that a good product owner should listen to feedback. And not only listen to feedback about how they're working and how they are doing their job, but also listening to the feedback about the product itself, because sometimes the delivery team can really give very good suggestions that, okay, maybe there is an alternative solution that would be useful, or maybe there is a quick win how we can get a good business value out of the current situation. So I think listening to feedback is also very important. And I think the majority of the product owners that I was working with were fulfilling these three criteria. However, they were busy. So basically, what we need to solve is that how to introduce BDD when the product owner is overloaded. And at least in our situation, it was obvious that we cannot just say that from now on we do BDD. This means that the product owner is spending even more time with the team and so on. It would have been great, but simply the situation was not allowing us to do that. So for us, it was clear right from the beginning that at least in short term, we cannot get too much extra time from the PO besides the time that they're anyway spending to that. So we had to use some kind of alternative solutions or alternative ways to solve this collaboration, which doesn't require extra time from the product owner. And one particular thing that works very, very well, and I really recommend you to do that. And the great thing about that is that you don't even have to tell to the product owner that you are doing BDD. Sometimes product owner get really scared if they hear that, okay, there is a new acronym that we need to deal with, or a new buzzword. But the great question that you can ask, for example, in a sprint planning meeting or a sprint planning preparation meeting, is just simply as that. So could you please give me a concrete example? So, and this question works in any situation. And if you are just asking this innocent question to the product owner, and this is a good product owner, then without too much extra time, they will be able to answer these questions, so that and they will give you some, able to tell you some story how this particular behavior will be observed by the end users at the end. So based on that, you can start moving on and start to collect the examples and start to write your scenarios. This is a very, very good question and very, very useful. The other good thing that we were doing, and I think this is also very useful, is that we were doing, based on the input that we got from the product owner and the business analyst, basically we were writing our own scenarios. We could hide them in our source control, so we were not forced to show them to the product owner. However, time to time we were going to the product owner and saying that, hey, this is a scenario that we have written. I think this is describing what you were saying. Could you just please make a double check? Is it really what you wanted? And this was also a very good question, because the product owner could really give an easy answer for that. It typically is a very focused question with a short time. We could get our confirmation that, okay, this is good like it is, or there is a small change needed. So basically, with these two questions, with these two small elements, we were starting to engage our product owner, however, in a way that we didn't require too much extra time from that. And the funny thing was that, and we were doing this for a couple of months, and the funny thing was that after a few months, we started to realize that something is changing. And basically, there were three core elements that we have seen changing, or three core elements that we have seen changing. The first thing, and I think this was very, very important to understand, that we realized that actually examples, so the answers for this, could you please give me an example questions? So these examples are really helping understanding the problem. This is not just a buzzword. And we were able to measure that. We were able to measure that in the number of questions that we have to do during the sprint. We were also able to measure that in the number of bugs that we had after the implementation. So it looked like that just by focusing our discussion a little bit through these examples, the team generally have a much better domain understanding, and many problems, which are many issues that were rooting from misunderstandings or different understandings of the same thing, were kind of solved, or at least they were not happening that often. The other thing that we have realized was that it looked like that guiding these discussions, which I said, for example, in the sprint planning preparation meeting, guiding these discussions by examples is a pretty efficient workshop facilitation technique. we didn't really expect it, that it was basically just dropping out. It was also surprising us in the first time. Actually, what we have realized that our meetings are much more focused and much more efficient. And once we started to think about what did we change, we realized that the only thing that we have changed is that now we are focusing our discussions on examples and these rules. And that the examples are illustrating. And we realized that probably become more efficient because we have less pointless discussion, and generally because our meetings are much more focused. So this is another very important learning, a very important benefit that we have seen, that finally simply our meeting got shorter and shorter. And nowadays, if you would like to learn more about this workshop facilitation technique, Matt Wim was describing essentially the same technique, and he gave a very good name to that, called example mapping. So if you Google for example mapping, then you will see, and you want to learn more about this, then there are quite good material out there that you can use to also practice this. And the third thing that we have realized, that it turned out that actually these BDD scenarios that we are writing are kind of good enough in terms of documentation. So it looked like that we don't need really extra documentation, at least for this aspect of the problem. So the product owner earlier was spending some time on writing Word documents or writing some prosa text into Jira tickets and so on. But actually, at the end, we were saying to the product owner that you don't need to do that. Actually, what we are writing, what we are documenting as scenarios is just simply good enough. So we even saved some time of the product owner. He didn't need to spend so much time on writing these textual documents, which are anyway getting outdated very quickly. So altogether, also seeing these three realizations or three things that we have learned, basically the common theme for that was that we have realized that more collaboration doesn't necessarily mean more time. And whenever I'm talking about with different people who are starting to adapt BDD, probably this is their most common fear, that they fear that they cannot invest more time into the collaboration. Their product owners are anyway too busy, they are anyway too overloaded. So, but the message should be that it doesn't necessarily like that. Of course, if the product owner can spend more time with the team, that's great. But even with the collaboration can be built up also based on based on cheap techniques, or sometimes it's even saving time of the product owner. Okay, so this was basically my second story, and the third and the last story that I want to share with you is a little bit different. Actually, it's about progress or progress tracking. And probably when you first hear about progress or progress tracking, it doesn't look like that it has to do anything with BDD. I mean, BDD is more like testing, engineering, or maybe requirement analysis technique. Progress tracking is more like something that you do as a project management thing in the project. But interesting, and also, I mean, for me, the progress tracking or taking care of the progress was typically an unanswered question. For a long time, I was working as a developer. Until I was working as a developer, progress feedback and progress tracking was absolutely not interesting for me. It was just an extra overhead that I had to do. Once I moved to the management side, I finally had to realize that whatever technique you do, altogether, it's pretty hard to get a good overview about the progress. And if it's hard to get a good overview about the progress, let's see whether BDD can help us in this situation, whether BDD can have any influence on that. And again, this is based on how we were working. So as I said, progress tracking was typically not very exciting for me. I have tried different techniques as a developer. I guess these are the techniques that, or these are the similar ways that you have probably also done. So like attending status meetings, they are typically not really exciting. We can say boring if your boss is not here. or sometimes I had to send some status reports per email after every week or every day, but I typically always forgot that, so it didn't really work. And of course, there was a lot of extra time from the project management side to process those emails. Of course, later on, when we introduced Agile, we had a task board, and task board was great, and there were some tasks moving around the different columns. However, if the product owner wanted to get an overview about the progress, they couldn't really, because the tasks were more technical things, and typically product owner didn't really understand how important or not important the different tasks are. So that was also not really useful. And obviously there are some tools which are helping you to, or they're forcing you to give some percentages, but typically these percentages are mostly not really valuable. So progress tracking is not very exciting. And whenever I was when I was thinking about this topic, I remembered a story that has happened to me many years ago. In my company, we generally had such kind of yearly events where the entire company was going away, and we were socializing with each other, and also try to improve our processes a little bit. And basically, there was one exercise which was a very, very good exercise, and the exercise was that every team had to draw a map of the software delivery process. And unfortunately, I don't have the map anymore that we have created like more than 10 years ago. But right now I was trying to redraw it from my memories. So this was more or less the map that we have created at that time. It was a kind of a funny exercise, and it was a lot of fun to create this map with the team. I don't remember all the details of how the map looked like, but I definitely remember that in the beginning, in the early parts of the delivery path, there were the flowers of early success, but later on we very quickly gone into the deep forest of the missing goals, and also on the end side of the software delivery, we had the moor of integration, the muddy stuff there, and at the end we had this bridge of release, which was basically always much harder to build than we expected before. So basically this is how the map looked like. However, what I want to focus on right now is what is in the middle. In the middle, there was a big yellow stuff, which we labeled as the desert of almost done. And if you think about that, then you can see also in the picture that in the desert of almost done, even the path, even the route is not that clear anymore. You are just doing, but you don't see your progress. So it's basically representing very well this the progress tracking issue that I was talking about. And this is probably what many teams are facing also in other projects as well. Typically the progress indications that we have in this in progress state are not very useful. Whatever is between 1 and 99% is almost done. However, we don't know whether we are in budget, because there can be some extra stuff in there. We don't know if I'm a tester, I don't know whether I can test a particular thing already. And if I'm a product owner, I don't know whether I'm able to give feedback for some parts of the user story. It's something like sitting in this almost done state, and nobody knows anything about the status at that stage. However, if we are practicing BDD, and if you are applying the BDD practices or BDD activities that we have seen, so we are discussing the requirements through examples, we are moving these examples or formulating these examples as scenarios, and we are automating the system example by example, then basically what you will see is that suddenly the scenarios are somehow become the track of progress. So basically every activity will be based on examples or the scenarios like that. So basically what you will see is that your tasks will be, at least this happened to us, so our tasks started to be aligned to the scenarios. So maybe we had still some technical tasks, but it was always very easy to group them, that this is to be able to achieve the first scenario, this is to be able to achieve the second scenario, and so on. Also, what happened that since we have stated such a goal that I want to improve the system in a way that it now supports this scenario, this was automatically focusing the team to implement the things into end-to-end manner. So trying to implement a full scenario in all the scales, and also the deployment scripts, also the release scripts, whatever else. So it was helping to us to reach some kind of vertical slicing. And also these scenarios are finally were becoming a very good elements, very important elements of the definition of done. So actually, to see these things, what you have to see is that if you see a percentage like 32%, and if you are comparing it with the report, where you see that which scenarios are passing and which scenarios are failing, this particular report is taken out of HIP test. What you can see is that the richness of this status is much more different. And if you look at the execution report of the scenarios as a tester, then for example, you can answer questions that, okay, it looks like that the logout is already working, so I can start testing it. Or if you are a product owner, you see that, okay, the cancellation is already works, so maybe you can start giving feedback about cancellation. Or on the other hand, if you see that buying many books is not working or not working yet, but you have anyway given feedback about cancellation and you have seen that this makes sense already in itself, then maybe you can decide that, okay, let's ship the product without the many buy books and separate them or split that up into a later story or later stage there. So basically it helps the product owner to better prioritize the things, and this kind of feedback, this kind of progress indication is much more rich, and you can get a lot of benefit out of that, and it's for free. So if you are anyway doing BDD, then these reports are coming for free. You don't need to work extra for that. So basically this is the end of my search story. So basically in all of these stories, we were trying to find an answer for whether BDD is for us or BDD is for me in particular situations. And as I said, in the book, there are many different contexts and many different pain points listed and the relation of them to BDD. So for example, how BDD works in fixed scope projects or distributed teams, or what should be done with if there are typically bugs versus the feature debates within the team, and many other situations as well. I will not list them all. But hopefully, at least from these three examples, you have seen some highlight of that. And at the end, what we have seen is that behavior-driven development is about understanding, documenting, and verifying the business requirements through these illustrative examples. And this should be the key message of all these stories here. And hopefully, if we are doing this and if we are going back to our team later, then we will see episodes or dialogues like this in a later season, so that product owner comes, there is a production issue, could we just look into that? And the team says that, yeah, sure, let's have a look about the related scenarios. And they're sitting together, they are trying to understand the situations through these scenarios, and probably they can figure out a better outcome for that. So, is BDD for me? That was my question, but maybe for you, it's the even more important question is whether BDD is for you. This is the end of my presentation part. We will have a quick demo of HIP test, and afterwards we will have the Q&A. If you still have some questions about whether BDD is for you, I'm trying to answer them as much as I can. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Priya.
Thank you so much. That was perfect. I am about to do a very quick demo of HIP test. This will be about 90 seconds. So for those who are interested, we actually got a ton of questions around, are there tools available? How can I start this? Where's the best place to start? And we have really good news. So we wanted to share with you this tool that is available called HIP test. It's a SmartBear tool. It's available for free. We also have other tiers of this tool available based off of what you need. And so walking you through this very briefly, on the left-hand side of my screen, you'll see is kind of the organization and the flow of the tool. On the left up top, you'll see where you define. So as Gaspar talked about, really rooting our scenarios and our test examples, test scenarios in our examples. And you can see that here where I talk about adding an order. If I actually go and click into one of my test scenarios, you'll see the Gherkin syntax which is used, our given, when, and then statements. In here, you'll also see our action words, which we can reuse over and over again. And then there's also another tab just that highlights all of these action words and tells you all the different places that your action words are used by, as well as their various revision history. The next section I wanted to show is this test section. The really cool thing about this is once you've actually written out your test cases, your test scenarios, you can export them into one of these 20 plus different frameworks. So you have Cucumber available, you also have Specflow, but you also have different frameworks such as Selenium, Mocha, RSpec, so on and so forth, whatever your team is already working on, so you don't have to leave what you're comfortable with. Finally, we have our learning section, which is our living documentation. Something I'm sure everyone on this webinar can relate to is documentation and how challenging or at least how frustrating it can be. And in HipTest, it automatically updates your documentation over and over again. So in here, you'll see this is the test scenario that we're testing, the JIRA issue that it's linked to, who actually ran the different tests on what browsers, so on and so forth, really updating and making sure that this is something that can scale and something that continues to be updated over time. So with that, that was our really quick demo. We have one final poll question we're going to go ahead and launch for you right now while we go on in and dive into a few of these Q&As real quickly. So Gaspar, I have a few queued up for you. And I think there were a few around the relationship between TDD, test-driven development, and behavior-driven development.
Okay, so BDD, test-driven development, and behavior. What was the third one? So test-driven development, behavior-driven development, and what was the third one?
Just those two, really.
Those two, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I think this is a very good question and very important. So basically, BDD and TDD are sharing the same concept. So both of them are basically guiding the development through tests. But the core difference, at least how many people are seeing that, is that that basically behavior-driven development is operating in the outside level of the application. So it's more focusing on the outside requirements of the application, where test-driven development are more focusing on the expectations of the particular units of the inner components of the system. So basically, it's the same concept. But BDD is for high-level expectations. TDD and unit tests are for lower level or technical level expectations. Typically, the teams who are practicing BDD are typically combining it with test-driven development as well, and they are doing it in a way that they are. Let's say that they are implementing their application by scenario. This means that let's say that they are starting with a failing scenario and they want to implement the code for that. Typically, this is a longer path because one scenario can really describe a more complex functionality of the system. And while they are doing that, while they need to introduce a couple of units or components into their system, there are smaller test-driven development loops inside. And basically, once the TDD loops are all done, at the end, also the BDD scenarios turns to green, and this is how the basic connection is done.
Wonderful. So if we wanted to implement BDD into our development cycle for a project, would you do this in one go, or would you do it slowly on a per feature basis until the team feels comfortable?
So I think having any kind of incremental introduction is always good, because BDD is providing you a quite clear guideline, but the context is also very important. Your context is also very important. So no one will be able to tell you as a fixed recipe that this is how you should do that. So because of that, I generally like to introduce it with for example, with one feature. I think that's a good way of doing that. Let's see how it works. Let's learn about our initial feedback. Let's change the things a little bit based on that, and then we can roll it out to other features as well. So yes, I would do this in a feature-based incremental way.
Nice. And then in our final minute, how does BDD really fit into the Agile methodology?
Mm-hmm. So that's also a very, very interesting and very good question. So actually, BDD is doesn't introduce anything fundamentally new in the Agile space. BDD, as Dan North was he was coming up with this term. He was calling it as a second generation methodology, which means that BDD is basically built on top of other Agile concepts and principles that are already existing, like specification, by example, like domain-driven design, like test-driven development, all these things, and it tries to combine them into a usable, practical flow. So basically, this is how you should see BDD. BDD is basically a practical process how you can get this these different useful agile practices and into a working flow. So basically, it tries to answer the question that, okay, I understand these concepts of what should I do tomorrow? What should be the first thing that I should do? This is what BDD should be able to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I know that's all we have time for. If you asked a question and we didn't get to it, I tried to type out answers as quickly as I could. And we will also make sure we follow up with you on that. As far as this webinar goes, we will be sending out the recording. We will be sending out the slides, but we want to also take some time to thank you all for joining us on this webinar today, as well as Gaspar. Thank you so much. It was such a great topic. We learned so much, and I really am looking forward to future webinars as well.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everyone.